The guest is Dr. David Padgett from Tennessee State University, who's given us information relative to chocolate cities in crisis and an analysis in terms of some of the problems that many of these cities face. And of course, Dr. Padgett, let's continue our discussion. I think you were dealing with Atlanta before we had our second commercial break. Let's continue there.
Yeah, Atlanta is truly a tale of two cities. It's known as Black Mecca, one of the major civil rights movement cities. And what really put Atlanta on the top of our list for Black enterprise was economic opportunity, entrepreneurship, and obviously Black Enterprise magazine appeals to those types of readers. And what set our survey apart was that we actually had readers respond and tell what they thought, and then we combined that with statistical data. So one side of Atlanta is the wealthy, you know, the Gwinnett County, which is just part of the metro area. Then there's the other Atlanta, which leads the nation in crime, which has pockets of poverty, which has all kinds of inequity in terms of transit, public transit. And so it's almost a two-faced city. But yet, Atlanta, again, never fails. I mean, more Black people moved to Atlanta over the past 10 years, I think, than any other city in the United States. And African Americans have flocked there by the hundreds of thousands, literally. And so as long as Atlanta is a place where Black people see opportunity, they're going to go there. Is it going to spread throughout the entire Black population? Well, that remains to be seen. Now, Detroit, the next city, next chocolate city is obviously you know, the home of Motown, but it's also the city that when we teach urban studies, it's always used as a model for urban decay. Detroit has been bleeding people. People have been leaving Detroit in droves. Detroit fell below 1 million people during this past census for the first time in 50 years. And it's literally, people are getting out of Detroit. It's like rats off of a sinking ship. Detroit, now with the automotive industry having its problems, things are getting even worse in Detroit. And they're almost, and they've got a young, dynamic mayor there, Kwame Kilpatrick, and he's young and he's energetic, and he's going to need to be energetic because that city has lots and lots of problems. And so, and I don't know, I mean, I'm almost speechless when it comes to Detroit.
You're very pessimistic in terms of what...
Now, Detroit, as I said, made the list the first year because we weren't as scientific with the survey as we would have been in other years. But Detroit performed poorly in almost all areas that we looked at. We looked at crime, we looked at economic opportunity, even cost of living. No matter what category we looked at. One of the categories we look at also is quality of child care, with 70% of our children being raised in single-parent households, and primarily women. Child care is an issue in our community, and if a city is not making some moves or making child care readily available, good, and giving those opportunities to women, we're not going to be happy. And I think Detroit was one of those cities that performed very poorly in that regard. Now, Birmingham is a city that made the list in 2004, didn't make it this year, purely due to lack of participation on the part of the respondents. We have to have a cutoff point for the minimum number of responses to have a good sampling pool. But the people who did respond responded very favorably for Birmingham. And if you think of it, it's really unusual. I mean, Birmingham was once known as Bombingham. It was once known as you know, just this at least the last place you want to be Black in the United States, almost was Birmingham if you were going to live in a city, maybe 40 years ago. And now it's this, it seems to be more progressive. It's a heavily, almost 75% Black city. It has its problems. And I'd probably say of all these cities, Birmingham is probably the least that's in crisis. But being in the South, being in this part of the country, they have issues going on there as far as health and economic opportunity. Because this part of the country, we're in the heart attack corridor or the coronary corridor, And so Birmingham falls into that category. You have, obviously being in the South, we're lagging behind somewhat in education. And so there are those challenges. But of all these cities, other than Atlanta, Birmingham is a surprise city, a pleasant surprise. But do they still have the crime there? Yes. Do they still have problems there? Yes. But it's the one city that might have some answers to some of the problems that we are seeing in some of these other cities.
You know, Dr. Padgett, when you talk about all of these cities, it seems that this kind of information ought to be made known to those individuals who are talking about a new era in terms of moving beyond where we are and opportunities and et cetera. And I think Congress, we have an election that's scheduled here, and all of these things. This ought to be good material for those individuals who are talking about trying to improve the lives of individuals all across America. Now, I think we might be dealing with chocolate cities here, but there ought to be some kind of movement somewhere in Congress, somewhere with some kind of force that can deal with all of these problems, because it seems that these are national problems, even though we talk about chocolate cities and et cetera. As the chocolate cities go, I would imagine as America would go too. Would not you say that?
Yes, exactly. In fact, in the 9 years of doing this study, what I've found is there are 3 areas with which African Americans are most dissatisfied. 1 is education, 2 is quality of child care, and 3 is a relationship between African Americans and the police. Those are the 3 poorest performing areas on the survey, which is frightening when we're living in cities that have high crime rates, but yet we don't get good police service. Then the last 2 both have to do with our children, which are our future, child care and education. There has to be a greater effort at improving education, and throwing money at education is not the answer. I mean, look at who we produce when we had nothing, when we had no money during the times of segregation, when we had children in little schoolhouses in the middle of nowhere, and yet a lot of those people have PhDs, MDs, JDs, and now we're not producing at that level when we had no money. And so the number one factor in determining the success or failure of a student is the investment, the emotional investment, and real investment that the teacher has in that classroom. And apparently must not be happening today. I'm not going to say anything bad about teachers. Maybe they're handicapped, maybe they're in a position where they can't. But I think, where do our children spend the most time in these cities? At school. And that's where they are the most of the time. And that's where we lose our black males, is in school. They go from school to special ed to prison. And I think that's the number one area that we have to invest in. Number 2, and I learned this again, was with child care. I don't have any children, but people that I know who do say child care is extremely expensive, and then good child care, it's almost a double-edged sword. I want to work so I can make money, but if I work, I can't be home with my kids, and then I spend all my money on child care. I don't have any money to improve. So there has to be some incentive, maybe some kind of tax break, or maybe something that could be done with incentives that can be given to either faith-based organizations or nonprofits to really make child care for women a lot more readily available. A lot of private companies now have some on-site child care, but we really have to make free women so that they're able to become even more active in their careers, because the woman is the first teacher of our children, and so if she's struggling, she's having a hard time, that's going to have an effect upon our children. And I don't have an answer for out-of-wedlock births. I don't have an answer for that, but we do know that whether these children are born in wedlock or out of wedlock, they spend most of their time either in child care or in school.
Dr. Padgett, let's see if you could give us an answer to this. Do you think that it would be cost-effective if the government and private agencies moved into these cities and attempted to deal with some of these problems? Would that be cost-effective?
Yeah, I think that if we're willing to invest, $80,000 a year to imprison somebody, then we could invest half of that or even and sending somebody to college for 4 years. I was listening to...
And so, of course, we're just about at the end of the show today, but I appreciate the information, and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you, and good morning.